This week, John Strand and I interview Rick Holland. He's currently the CISO at Digital Shadows. Rick has a long career in security, which includes being in the U.S. Army, is the co-chair of the SANS Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit, and was an analyst at Forrester. John shows us Office 365 user behavior analytics tool. And then in the enterprise security news this week, VMware launches a blockchain project. And then before you poo-poo it, we've got some insights that will hopefully make it not so poo-pooey. And then Minerva strikes a partnership with McAfee. Atos is named a leader in IoT services. Canonical announces some Ubuntu Linux security and a whole lot more. So stay tuned for this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is
Excellent.
A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs IncMan SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. IncMan SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/Security Weekly and request to see IncMan SOAR live in action. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome everyone to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode 104. For August 29th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. On the lines via Skype is Mr. John Strand. John, welcome.
Hello, Paul. Happy to be back on the show. I think this is like 2 weeks in a row, which I'm not sure that might be a record.
It could be. Could be. Did someone, steal your ceiling? Or
No, this is actually the new office. Erica is behind me and she's working, but no, it's all that building that was like a horror movie. We completely gutted it, completely redid it, and we're probably just going to leave the rafters exposed. Just because, what the hell, it looks cool.
And then you could have monkeys as pets, and they'd be happy.
Actually, Erica, Paul just said that we could literally have monkeys as pets in here.
She might.
Yeah, she thinks that's a good idea.
That's a cool. I mean, they like to throw poop and stuff at you, but other than that, I mean,
that's okay. We have children. We're used to
Oh, it's really funny. A couple of quick announcements. I think the first one will probably be about our webcast. With myself and Joff Thayer and the fine folks at Javelin Networks. If you have Active Directory, which is most of you out there, and you're concerned about the security of it, which should be all of you that have Active Directory, you should tune into this webcast. It's about how to get attackers to contain themselves. Joff will be talking about some tried and true methods for lateral movement within an organization. Javelin will also talk about that and ways to prevent it in your Active Directory environment. Go to securityweekly.com/Javelin to sign up today. And I would like to welcome to the program today Rick Holland. As I said, he is the CISO at Digital Shadows. Former, I think we established that while I was at Tenable, Rick was the analyst on the other end of the phone. So it's really weird now to have him on the show in a different setting. Rick, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here, Rick. So, Rick, tell us a little bit about your background in enterprise security and about some of your experiences and kind of how you landed in the CISO role today.
Yeah, it's interesting. My way to get into security, a lot of times people will cuss out compliance, but if it wasn't for Mr. Sarbanes and Mr. Oxley, I would have never made it in security. I was fresh out of the Army where I did intelligence, and I was kind of sick of wiping and reimaging Windows XP machines, and we needed someone to work with Deloitte on Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and I was like, I'll do it, and kind of parlayed that into a full-time security gig. And then my first real security job where I wasn't the security person was at the University of Texas at Dallas for about 2 years. And EDU is, especially for listeners out there that have worked in those environments, is a pretty interesting environment to work in because you got students hacking grades, you've got students hacking for their version of responsible disclosure. We had to work with the FBI on 2 notifications for students being targeted. So I really cut my practitioner teeth in EDU, and I really like EDU. I like to go back and teach there. I guest lecture at a couple universities here in Dallas where I'm at now. And then I kind of go ahead.
I was just going to say, I usually say if you're a bad security practitioner, you die, you go to hell, you get to come out and do computer security at a university. So you've clearly paid your penance.
I spent several.
Don't get paid much. Don't get paid much either.
I spent several years at that's where I cut my teeth as well, implementing security program for a local university here in Rhode Island. And it's interesting that you mentioned students doing stuff. I worked in the university time like 2001 to 2006. And there were so many Microsoft Windows worms running around during that time period that I think when I was in the security team, students could hack whatever they wanted, and we were just busy dealing with, everything getting compromised by worms. So,
yeah, I love my time at EDU. It was challenging and not paid very well either.
And then I believe we met when you were at Forrester, correct? As an analyst. How long did you spend at Forrester?
So I was at Forrester, let's see, I've been gone 2.5 years now, and I was there 4.5 years. A local guy here in DFW, John Kindervog, was a Forrester analyst, and I used to be a customer of his, and John recruited me to join Forrester. It's actually a very instrumental kind of mentor figure for me. He's Mr. Zero Trust, as I like to call him, and I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the Zero Trust model. So yeah, John recruited me to Forrester, and while I was there, how we had interacted was I covered vulnerability management, incident response, threat intelligence, email and web gateways. Some really exciting tech right there.
That's awesome. So Rick, we talk on this show how we can help our audience navigate the various categories of security. What's kind of your general advice if you're in an enterprise today and you've got problems and you're trying to find solutions? Like, where do you start?
It's overwhelming. Even as an analyst that covered the segments that I covered, it was difficult to stay up with all the vendors that were startups. And I was always keen to look at startups because, the traditional security behemoths weren't necessarily solving problems for people. So as an analyst, I found it difficult. And now as a CISO, and to your security leaders, security architects, CISOs, anyone on security teams are looking for, solutions to your problems, is really difficult to navigate. So I think, content like this is a good place to go. I was always big on the Innovation Sandbox at RSA, SciNet as another place. And there's been a lot of these startup kind of Shark Tank things that have evolved where you can sit and listen to a bunch of vendors pitch, maybe find an up-and-coming space that you didn't know. Maybe somebody that covers Docker security as, maybe an up-and-coming space, and that's something interesting to you. But I do think relying on your channel is something else. I used to be a sales engineer at Accuvant. And so whoever, rest in peace, Accuvant, whoever your channel partners are today or your SIs, whoever it is, relying on those folks to kind of help you with the emerging vendors that are solving problems that you have. But I mean, people got to start with the problems that they need, not with the vendors that are looking to solve a problem.
What are some of the more interesting categories of security companies that you find today, Rick?
I almost think more interesting, like if I think about things that I'm very interested in now, I don't know that it's interesting companies necessarily. It's some of these persistent problems. We always joke around about people saying the basics. Even when I was an analyst, I wasn't ignorant to, the basics aren't easy, but things I'm particularly interested in are privileged accounts, reducing attack surface, discovering new assets in my environment, both, my traditional on-prem environment and then AWS as another example. So, a lot of the spaces, it's not necessarily cutting edge, bleeding A round, C round companies that are out there. It's some of the traditional places. These basics are hard to solve. And, I think I'm looking at that just like any of your listeners are.
Mm. Now, you covered vulnerability management a while back, and how has that changed? Certainly, the three big players in that space have made some interesting moves and pivots even.
Yeah, it is quite interesting. One of the things that I thought when I first started 2.5 years ago was really how little. Well, if I would fast forward, actually, it's probably like November, because November is when I became CISO. So I was actually practitioner again, and it had been 8 years since I'd been on the practitioner side, roughly between Accuvant and Forrester. And I thought SIEM was another space that I thought, man, there's not been a lot that has evolved. I think on the vulnerability side, and I'm particularly interested in this, like the host-based approach, I think has been pretty big, where most of the players there are now looking to do things on the host because, just like a pen test, just like a vuln scan, the moment it's complete, it's potentially out of date. So I'm pretty interested in the host-based stuff. You still have the problem of discovering the assets that you might want to deploy a host-based agent to. Even leveraging the vulnerability capabilities on EDR platforms is pretty interesting. If I already have an EDR agent running, if they can do vulnerability, maybe I don't have to add yet another agent. Vendors always on the agent side, still, when they say a small footprint, I'm like, of course, when's the last time you heard any endpoint security vendor say they have a large, obnoxious footprint? Everybody has a small footprint, but when I have 15 small footprints, a small footprint that does not make.
Yeah. We haven't talked to, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, that's one of the things we like to talk about with many of the people that come on the show is, do you feel like this endpoint security market is a bit oversaturated because there are so many players? I mean, Paul and I were talking about it last show. It seems like every week there's a new endpoint security product that we just never heard of before.
Yeah. I think because I covered this space, at least from a DFIR perspective at Forrester. And I think at one point, so this would have been 3 years ago, I was tracking over 50 vendors on the endpoint, more on that side. And now you've got so many that are out. In fact, if I was to hear someone that was new, that was an endpoint player, I'm like, man, you really picked a crowded market to have your idea for. That could be tough to get traction, especially when you have the billion-dollar valuations for several of the players in the space. So if I was an entrepreneur, endpoint security is probably not an area that I would do a startup on.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to carve out the niche. And I think one of the emerging trends I'm seeing in the endpoint space is some of the new companies that I actually am excited about. They're like, yeah, the end user desktop endpoint space is really crowded, but what about the server platforms and what's hosting my application? And because protecting your application with a WAF, a next generation WAF, RASP, and all dynamic scanning and all of that stuff is really hard. What if we were to focus on the application endpoint, put something on that platform that can do the similar things, but in light of protecting the application rather than the end user?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach. I mean, it's an issue like any CISO trying to secure, especially that builds software like we do, something that you want to be concerned about.
Absolutely. So back to vulnerability management. The way I assess the market, I'm not sure how closely you follow the market today, is that the three big players have really diversified, right? I think Tenable certainly today messaging on their new capabilities with the web application stuff and container security. Rapid7 has a very different approach. They're a more encompassing solution than any of the other three players out there, and they have that unified agent. Qualys, I feel like, is still kind of playing catch up. But Rick, what's your kind of assessment?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. You think think Rapid7, Insight. In fact, I remember I covered Rapid7 as well, obviously, and when Insight first came out, and to see how that tool has evolved for them. So yeah, very different strategies between the three. Qualys recently made an acquisition, although I don't remember what it was, a company I wasn't familiar with. But I mean, certainly probably between Tenable and Rapid7, you've seen the most change, especially with the IPOs.
Yeah. Yeah, Qualys picked up that passive scanner, which we have as a story this week, which is interesting because Tenable has the patent on vulnerability in a passive mode, and Qualys seems to be messaging on discover your assets is what we were talking about before to fill those gaps. Like you can deploy agents in all three of these different vendors, but what about the stuff you don't know about? How do you get an agent on them if you don't know about it?
Yeah, well, you just go to the CMDB, which is always up to date and is going to give you the perfect list of all the assets in the environment.
Right. Absolutely. Now, one problem that I see still today with vulnerability management in particular is the ineffectiveness of the reporting and tracking remediation in a vulnerability management program. And from that, I'm pretty sure you probably tracked the adjacent market of your Risk.io, which is now Kenna, and RiskSense, and NopSec now is playing in that space. What's your assessment? Do you think the big vulnerability management players are going to be able to give customers great reporting, ability to prioritize risk and tracking remediation, or are we still going to have to go to a different set of vendors to get that functionality?
I've always been frustrated when I covered this space, and even now, if you look at vulnerabilities and you go into an example there with prioritization, so exploits in the wild, something's in Metasploit. I always felt like the vulnerability management players were having a hard time helping people out with the prioritization, which is why I think you've seen these other vendors have some success there. But to me, ultimately, I think those VM players should be doing that. I don't want to have to buy. Yeah, I have a joke from Forrester, and it's very relevant now. Instead of defense in depth, I always call it expense in depth. Like I just buying more crap and layering more crap and spending more money and then not taking advantage of functionality. So if I'm going to center on one of the vulnerability management players, which in many ways you might be able to say kind of the commoditized space, why don't they add this other capability and do it? Why do I have to buy something different for them to help me out? So I don't know. I was always critical of that there when I was at Forrester, and I still kind of see this problem persist, that people are seeking out someone to help with them with the triage of these vulnerabilities, and then actually, execution on the remediation side of it.
Yeah, and one thing I always wanted too was, well, if you can find all these vulnerabilities and you're on all of the hosts, why can't you help me fix the problems too? And it seems like no one's wanted to dip their toe in that water.
No, and I think we still have problems on many organizations with any kind of automated response or remediation. I mean, I think a lot of folks will take Windows events on certain hosts or Windows updates and automatically apply them. But I still think we have this, even with the rise of the automation and orchestration solutions, the Demistos and those guys of the world, Phantoms, there's still this hesitance to actually deploy automated patching, configuration changes. I mean, I think when you get into like Elastic infrastructure and you've got Chef and Puppet running, that may be a little bit different environment because it's very homogeneous and you feel like you can do that stuff really quickly. I always think it would be nice to be a company that's only ever been in the cloud. Of course, it has its own problems, but you don't have that. You're not encumbered by all that investment in legacy systems.
Yeah. Another interesting category is attack simulation, and there's a lot of vendors emerging in this space, and I think it addresses a couple of different issues. One being, like you said, the crap in depth, or what did you call that?
Expense in depth.
Expense in depth. And
I like crap in depth, though. That's pretty good.
Depth, right? And so, but you don't know what's working, and if it is, you don't know what the limitations are. So this whole new space emerged. Basically, now there's vendors that help you test your vendors. Have you looked into this space, and what's your assessment?
Yeah, actually, the last piece of research that I did before I joined Digital Shadows was on kind of reinventing pen tests, and I had a bunch of sections in it, but the last one I did was on this particular space. Back then, it was Attack IQ, Safe Breach, and then what was, I think, vThreat. Marcus down in Austin's company.
ThreatCare. Yep.
Yeah, ThreatCare. I think they rebranded. I may be wrong on that, but I was very interested in that space just because, again, why don't I test what I've invested in? If I've got some kind of DLP control, let me validate it. If I'm supposed to be blocking tunneling through my layer 7 firewall, why don't I try to tunnel stuff through it? So conceptually, I like that space. I have heard, because I've been talking to other CISOs and industry analysts on it, as I'm thinking about new things to evaluate that could help with investment. I hear it's kind of expensive, just the anecdotal feedback that I've got from folks.
Interesting. Now, John obviously runs a pen test company. How do you balance that attack simulation with your more traditional pen tests?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, he's kind of a couple hats, I think, on it. One, from CISO and having customers and needing to show that I'm having an external party coming in. That's always going to continue. I think a lot of people are saying that breach simulation, whatever you call the space, is going to, the pen test is dead. And I almost think long live the pen test, because anyone that's providing a service and wants to have attestations for their customers, that's what people are asking for. And third-party risk management is actually one of the more irritating things to have to do day to day from a CISO perspective, because you're largely living in a world of checkbox surveys. You struggle to actually get good context on the vendors that you're bringing in that area. So I don't see the traditional pen test dying. If anything else, I want an independent third party to come in and assess the environment.
Well, a couple of quick notes on that. One, we're testing incredibly complicated infrastructures, right? And any type of automated platform that you have that tries to automate as much of the pen test is not going to be able to cover it. And that's okay. I wouldn't expect them to. But what's interesting about that is we have companies that actually do implement those products. And what's cool is it takes 80% of the low-hanging fruit that we normally find off the table. And that's great for us because it allows us to focus on more obscure and cutting edge techniques, which is great. And that's really what they're trying to hire us to come in and do. And I think a good analogy is like QuickBooks and Quicken didn't kill the accounting industry. It just made it easier for a lot of people to do that basic level of due diligence. And then you still need to have an expert in some situations come in. So I think that analogy tends to work out. So yeah, I think that pen testing will go through a bit of a change. I know at DerbyCon, Dave, Ed Scotus, and I are going to be giving a panel discussion on it. But that type of evolution is necessary. And I think it's good and it's going to be healthy in the long run.
Well, I think it would result in a better product, because I used to even sell Accuvant Labs pen testing. So covering it, selling it, and now using the services. I'd rather you focus on higher non-commodity type of things. Maybe we're doing some kind of red teaming stuff on a very specific application in my environment, and you're using attack techniques of people that target my sector. That sort of stuff. I'd rather get more value out of the results than, oh, wow, you broke into my environment. Of course you broke into my environment. What pen tester's not broken into an environment? Very few.
I think that's a nice segue into one of the things I've been thinking of along these lines. Is a lot of organizations, when they engage with a pen test, the first step is to identify assets and externally facing assets, right? And I'm just shocked at the percentage of organizations that learn something new about their externally facing assets when they engage with a pen test company. How big is that problem today, and why is that?
It's interesting because you think about digital footprints, ever expanding, and we'll see it with our customers. If you financial services is a good example, probably an obvious example. Lots of M&A, so they've acquired many companies over many years. So that digital footprint is always evolving. So I don't know that justifies it, but I can understand in those types of industries that being a major factor. And we see it in our client base for sure. So, again, I think, the pen test, or even just having periodic scanning of Nmap on your external, IP space, and you see new hosts coming up. Stuff that's kind of simple. I think it goes back to the basics. I think we can all agree that, monitoring your external digital footprint is one of the basics that you should do. But because of the complexity of environments, because of third parties, because of M&A activity, I think that does make it difficult to actually maintain.
Yeah, certainly the ease of deployment of something new that's externally facing, like that bar is so low now. Like anyone in the organization can stand something up today and have it be externally facing, right?
Yeah, it's a tough job. It's a tough job for sure.
I've always wondered why internal teams haven't focused on that more, because as you mentioned, it's a basic, right? However, I think there's some limitations as to like what you can pull off the shelf for open source that fall down pretty quickly. You experience that as well?
The other side, open source, as a big open source guy at EDU, the other thing, Becca from Rapid7 had a line at Threat Intel Summit that we run a couple years ago regarding open source things. It was open source threat intel, but applied. She's like, open source is like free as in puppies, right? You get something that's open source. Well, you got to have the skill set to maintain it. It's right. There's nothing free about it. All of the operational overhead associated with it. And I think that also is a complexity on the open. In EDU, we had that problem. We were running FreeBSD and Snort and Spam Assassin and, Clam AV. Mm-hmm. And if you had somebody leave, you lost all that knowledge. So I do like to open source as much as possible. But yeah, there's challenges there as well.
Mm-hmm. John, one of your favorite topics is threat intelligence, certainly. Mm-hmm. And I think we suffer from this problem in threat intelligence where, sure, there's lots of open source threat intel feeds, but the management of them and what you'd have to build to take advantage of them, I think sucks up too much time and people use them wrong.
Well, but I think that there absolutely could be value in it, right? Like if you're actually researching an attack, to be able to have a good, solid threat intelligence vendor where you can do research and pull it in, I think that's fantastic. Whereas one of our stories for today, and I'll talk more about it whenever we get there, is CrowdStrike's implementation of Yara rules. And I hate Yara rules with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. It's basically taking the idea of a blacklist and making a really complicated blacklist and somehow expecting that to work better. But I think that that's just like any type of security technology. It can definitely be abused and not used properly. And that's one of the main concerns that I have about it. So, Rick, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a great analogy. I think about it for us now, or I even think about back in the day when I was at that university, we used Snort, and we could DDoS ourselves with Snort alerts, but we use it very surgically. So when we had, although I didn't call it intrusions back in the day, but when we were working in intrusion, our Snort rule set was sitting behind a tipping point IPS for all the commercial stuff, and we only put signatures related to specific adversaries or campaigns, although we didn't call it that back in the day either. So I think Yara could be useful for very specific things. But yeah, Yara rules can get complex pretty quickly. I like that. I like that analogy.
Well, and I talked to some people, and it's hard because there's really, really, really bright people that are doing amazing things with like threat intelligence. Like one of the people I was talking with when I was in Toronto earlier this year, he said, yeah, I receive all these different threat intelligence feeds, and I go through and I generate my own Yara rules based on the feeds. And then I search across my entire environment, trying to find those attacks in my environment. And the thing that kept on hitting me is, one, that's just awesome. Like the technical chops to pull that off is really, really brilliant. But that whole workflow is predicated on the thought that you believe your AV, your firewall, your IPS, your mail gateway, all of those things have fundamentally failed at their job. So if you're rocking at doing that says that you're great, but it also says whatever security technologies you're using probably fundamentally suck. And you are not going to be able to compete with thousands and thousands of engineers that are writing the signatures for the products every single day.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. May even go back to the expense and depth analogy a little bit, where you have the wrong stack. I also used to kind of rail on this whole, it's all about prevention, and then we kind of pivot to it's all about detection. And really, you kind of need both, because you do want prevention to reduce the amount of noise that you have to look at. You have limited technical resources, you have limited human resources. So that's one of my annoyances now, is when anyone's either it's all about prevention or all about detection. It's really about blending both. And some of the vendors are really digging in on to either side of that argument.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. We did an interview with a sponsor of ours from Bandura Systems, and I want to get you guys, take on this. I thought if people use it correctly, as we've already described, that it's fantastic. And basically, they aggregate multiple threat intelligence feeds, and they calculate their own score. So, if there's overlap, they'll do that aggregation of the score, and they dump that onto a layer 2 appliance and can do the blocking at scale. And I'm like, that speaks to your point, Rick. I think one of their major pain points they solve is, look, if you take a bunch of threat intelligence feeds and you can wipe that out before it hits, the perimeter of your network, then you've got a much easier job in tuning and working with all the rest of your tools.
Yeah, I know those guys. I think it was Todd who was
Yeah,
on with you.
yeah. Todd was on. Mhm.
Yeah, I actually caught up with him at Black Hat. Used to be a customer of mine at Forrester at a previous role that he was at. Yeah, it's interesting because if you look back, I'll bring up the Norse name to go further back in time, but Norse actually had an appliance that they were using for all of their feeds because the traditional proxy, you look at a proxy SG and what you could put in a watch list dies really, really quickly at the scale with which you might feed that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's a need there because the traditional network security devices aren't able to manage the scale with which some of these threat. I like to call IOCs indicators of exhaustion because they just overwhelm. And I think that's a good analogy for the traditional network security devices. So things like Vendora and what they're doing can help out there.
John, do you agree that's a good use case for threat intelligence? I mean, you're probably one of the most vocal about threat intelligence.
Yeah, I think that that's a fine use case. Like I said, the only use case that I really hate is people ingesting it and then collecting stories and then thinking that by somehow getting these stories, they're going to be immune to different attacks. Yeah, I think that that's absolutely fantastic.
The one thing I would say on to your point, John, like if you're talking about your investment, and I'm going to go out and invest in a bunch of commercial providers, and I'm going to go invest in a tip or whatever, but I don't have a good way to discover. There's all these other security controls that you might want to prioritize ahead of that. Maybe use open source. I did a talk at RSA. I did a threat intelligence maturity model about 4 years ago, and I was kind of talking about these concepts of maybe you do open source first while you make sure the rest of your stack is in a good spot, because you're wasting money if you're going straight to things like that and you don't have some of these fundamentals that are really important for your team.
Well, and you talk about using the open source stuff. I think that's a good approach. The other thing to think about in terms of trying to even go down that route is signal to noise ratio. Whenever you're working with threat intelligence feeds, the more that you can reduce that signal to noise ratio, the better. And some examples of that would be, do you filter the traffic going out to the internet through a web proxy? Are you taking anything that's uncategorized in your list and blocking the uncategorized list in your web proxy? Do you restrict all outbound ports so somebody just can't tunnel over SSH? Do you have your firewalls enabled on the inside of your environment so your workstations can't communicate with each other directly? I think that there's a lot of things you can do that are just good housekeeping before trying to put another layer of analytics on top of it. The problem whenever you put that analytics layer on top, whether it's an endpoint security product or a threat intelligence feed that's hooking into your SIEM, if you haven't done that due diligence to clean up that signal to noise ratio, you're going to have a ridiculous amount of false positives and you're going to be chasing your tail more than you bargained for.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the indicators of exhaustion analogy. I mean, I think for most organizations, IOC should, enrich investigations and be just another tool. I always get worried when people are going to push this stuff immediately without thinking to some kind of blocking control, especially when you get into the open source world, because it may not be relevant to you and your threat model, which is a big problem in the threat intel provider space as well.
Another kind of dotted line to this is a lot of enterprises come to us, and John, I'm sure as well, right? And they want the dark web, deep web analysis. What's the value in that? And I think mileage varies, right? Like some companies come to me and like, yeah, we engaged with this company, and like they didn't find anything on the dark web about us, and so they're like, I didn't get any value out of that. I'm like, well, that's an interesting data point, but how do we make usage of this type of data?
Yeah, I like to call it the derp web. This is also perhaps I recognize my own bias from talking to a bunch of the suppliers in this space, and we do it at Digital Shadows as well at Forrester. And I would get iceberged to death, and there would be the iceberg, and they're talking about the derp web, deep web, dark web. But what I have seen both, as a supplier of this, and then at Forrester, it kind of depends on the vertical that you're in. If you're in financial services, if you're in retail, you're probably very likely to have people selling consumer data. Account takeover is huge. Mm-hmm. And multi-factor authentication is pretty huge as a result of that sort of thing. So we'll deal with some customers where we won't find things on the dark web form, or it may be very rare. It may be someone is selling RDP access to their environment, or it may be that their name has come up on a target list that some adversary is wanting to get access to their environment. But so I do think it's vertical specific, but certainly financial services, e-commerce, retail, consumer businesses are pretty big. We'll see a lot in healthcare as well as people are targeting PHI and things along those lines. But certainly people need to look at first of all, people need to have a threat model. And I think a lot of people don't. And then when they look at their threat model and see how likely is that there, and then think about that in the context of other things that they need to be aware of.
Mm, absolutely. Rick, anything else you wanted to chat about today?
I don't know. Is there any kind of inside ball on the analyst world that you think would be interesting? How to work with analysts? I don't know. Is there anything that you think from some of our pre-conversation that might be good to bring up?
Yeah, I think, that's a good question, because I think it also kind of, when we talk about from an analyst perspective what you want to hear from vendors, I also think that there's a great parallel into, as a customer or potential customer, what I want to hear from vendors. So how can vendors both communicate better with analysts and communicate their message out so that we in the industry know what problems they're solving, which is something we really struggle with?
Oh yeah, I mean, just think about the expo floors of RSA and Black Hat, and every vendor has the same messaging, and you have no clue what they actually do. So when I was getting briefings from analysts, or when we try to do our briefings to analysts or even to prospects, I mean, I think it's outcome focused. Like, what problem do you solve? I don't care that you are an NSA or GCHQ or 8200. You maybe give that as bona fide and then move on very quickly. But what is the problem that you're solving for a customer? What is their outcome? You'll see so many vendors that start off and spend on a 30-minute conversation with a prospect or an analyst, 30 minutes setting the scene in a 30-minute call. Maybe you probably don't need to talk about the problem space too much. 5 minutes on that, and then what's the actual solution that you're providing? What itch do you scratch for the customer? And I think that's probably the fundamental thing that's missing from a lot of pitch decks that are out there.
The other thing is, please, for the love of all that's holy, I really don't care who's invested in your company. Like, if you're like, well, if you go to a website of a company and right there, the main part of their website is they just got $10 million of Series A. I don't care. If I'm trying to buy your product, that means little to nothing to me at all.
I think you got to start with what problem are you solving? How are you going to make their life easier? And then when I think about budget, where am I going to get the budget from? Is this new budget that I have to build? Can I take budget from something else? Because this is a funny kind of observation. Well, at least I think it's funny, so maybe it's not. But next generation. When I was a sales engineer, when I was a practitioner, when I was an analyst, I hated the word next generation. Now I kind of appreciate it. On the vendor side, next generation means you can go after old generation budget. And now as a CISO, as I'm trying to create budget or find budget, if something is next generation, it means I can go and cannibalize the old generation budget. So it's a little bit easier on the budgeting side. So sad to say, I actually appreciate next generation just a little bit. Whereas before I loathed it more than anything else in this world.
Yeah, it's certainly a topic we're talking a lot about on our network is, how to evaluate solutions and how to get the right communications from the vendor, and also coaching the vendors on the right things to say. There was several analysts, I think Anton and Adrian Santabria, have all written articles about when you do a briefing with an analyst, these are the things you want to consider. And again, I think that's a great kind of segue into, by the way, when you talk to your customers, you probably want to have the same kind of talking points.
Absolutely. Yeah, if there's the blogs that they did on it was on a Twitter stream where there's probably 8 or 9 analysts across four or 5 different firms that got in on that. So if you're especially if you're on the vendor side, I recommend you take a look at those blogs and then look at the tweets that those blogs came off of.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, Rick, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. It was great catching up with you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
And with that, we'll take a short break. John's going to talk about Office 365 user behavior analytics, so stay tuned. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. In 2017, an increasing number of companies reported they did not have effective insider threat detection methods. LogRhythm's UEBA solutions enable you to detect and neutralize user-based threats in real time, while built-in scenario and behavior-based analytics empower you to expose insider threats, compromised accounts, and privilege misuse. Visit logrhythm.com to learn how their UEBA solutions can help you expand visibility and enhance detection capabilities. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ESW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Turning it over to Mr. John Strand. Talk about Office 365 UEBA, User Behavior Analytics.
What's the E? The entity? The crap.
Entity, yes.
God, we need more acronyms.
Yes.
So this was a topic I was really excited to get involved with last week. We were working with some customers and we were talking about defenses against certain types of attacks that they may encounter. Specifically the attacks that we launch whenever we're attacking cloud services. So for those of you who don't know, we've got tools like Cred Sniper and Mail Sniper and Cred King, and they're all designed for trying to attack cloud-based email, gain access through cloud-based email, and then take over your cloud-based infrastructure. And it's hard when you're doing this for a living, especially with new emerging technologies, and you're testing it and your customer comes to you and says, what can we actually deploy to stop these types of attacks? And the answer is basically telling them to pray. And it's really, really cool whenever we have a vendor that does the right thing and starts implementing the right thing in their infrastructure. So we came across the the Office 365 Cloud App security policies that you can implement in your organization if you're Office 365, and you should be looking at moving to Office 365. If you're trying to manage all of your own internal email, manage your own servers, that's just a disaster waiting to happen insofar as management and patches and configuration and vulnerabilities and attacks. You really should be trying to look to move your email infrastructure to the cloud as quickly as possible. And I think Office 365 is something that requires a tremendous amount of consideration for any security conscious organization. Let me explain why. So Office 365 has recently incorporated their security configuration settings, and you can do a bunch of amazing things. One, you can generate a series of alerts, and we'll talk about the policies that you can alert on here in just a little bit, but it also supports full PowerShell. So you can create your own PowerShell scripts for those alerts as well. And I know that that's important for power users who desperately want to have the capability to get underneath the hood, tweak the settings, and set things up so it works appropriately with their SIM. Having that type of alert functionality and the ability to actually configure it is just fantastic. But what really got me was the policies. We've mentioned it on Enterprise Security Weekly a number of times, how we at Security Weekly as a whole, it'd be like Larry and Carlos and the whole team and Joff and Paul, we love user behavioral and entity analytics. Now, it does take a lot of love, care, and feeding. You shouldn't expect it just to be plug and play, a single pane of glass, because that crap does not exist, so stop looking for it. But it is incredibly effective when using it properly to identify an attacker in your network. Now, the idea of user behavioral analytics is if you have a user account that's simultaneously logged in to multiple computer systems, that may be abnormal. It could be a service account. You may have to create an exception filter for it. But a standard user account being logged into multiple systems is something that should not happen. Having an IP address that is trying to authenticate simultaneously to 40,000 accounts within a space of 5 minutes is also abnormal. That can be an indication of a password spray. Having a user that's logged into 2 geographic locations at the same time, it would be another example of something that's just not feasible. It should not happen. And it turns out that with the Office 365 Cloud App Security, it actually has those policies. Some of my favorite policies that exist is multiple failed user logon attempts to an app. That would be from a remote IP address and a ton of failed login attempts. Now, you're going to have multiple failed login attempts for like a university or an IP address, but you can actually establish thresholds. And how many failed login attempts from a specific IP address over a specific time frame would actually trip that alert, which is awesome. Let's say mass download by a single user. This is kind of the Edward Snowden detection type capability. If you have a user all of a sudden that is now pulling down every single file that is available to that user and then pulling those files down to their local system, that would also be an anomaly that you would want to look at as well. Login from a risky IP address. We were talking about threat intelligence feeds in the earlier segment of the show, and a lot of threat intelligence feeds are doing reputational services based on IP addresses. So if you have a login from an IP address, in many situations it breaks it down to an ASN, and it says, look, this ASN in Kazakhstan is something that is just bad. It's just a horrible neighborhood, dogs and cats living together, a whole bunch of furries, just crazy things going on over there. If all of a sudden you have a login from that IP address, that's something, or that IP address range or that ASN, that is something to look into as well.
So John, this is all built into Office 365.
Yes, sir. For $3 per user per month. Or not,
okay.
Yeah, $3 per user per month.
Okay, service I subscribe to. But that's, it's interesting. When we first started the show, we were covering user behavior analytics as like a separate category. And it was one of the ones that just very quickly just got sucked into everyone's feature set. And either those companies got acquired or pivoted. And then the larger players, such as Microsoft, just built this service right into their products.
Dude, and that's something we've been talking about for quite a while, right? Let's look at the endpoint security market space, right? So in the endpoint security market space, you have artificial intelligence, machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, all of that crap. And you have all these products out there. You have CrowdStrike, you have your Cylance that are doing that. But it's just a matter of time before your Microsoft, your McAfee, and your Symantec are implementing it. More importantly, just rolling it into their products that they already have.
Yep.
And that becomes a very difficult hill to climb.
Yep, it's a feature.
So, like I said, check it out, because for me as a pen tester, if an organization is properly instrumented, their security policies, their anomaly detection policies properly, it's going to shut down a tremendous number of different remote attacks that we use constantly to try to get into an organization. So you really should be looking at it. And right now, what's comparable in Google is Jack. You can get some logs. You usually have to pay more money to get into a higher tier to get access to logs. But then you'd be doing a lot of ad hoc analysis. And we've heard some people say, well, Google handles that for us. That may not be the case from what we've seen so far. And then there's also third-party CASBs that you can implement on top of Google to actually implement that functionality. And that gets into that whole market again, Paul. If you look at the cloud security access broker market space, that is all predicated on the fact that anybody that's doing any type of cloud-based authentication sucks at it right now. And their entire market space is on Google sucking and AWS sucking and Microsoft sucking. And if those vendors start getting to the point where they don't do this horribly, all of a sudden it's going to put a whole market segment into severe risk. And for $3 a month per user, that's actually a really, really good cost for this product.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, a lot of the trend is understanding when you go to a provider such as Microsoft for Office 365 is understanding what they provide for security controls and configuration is super important. And I think that there's a learning curve that we have. We're all about adopting SaaS and cloud, but we haven't stepped back to understand what security controls can be put in place, how to manage and monitor them. First of all, that they actually exist. Like, I didn't know this existed, right? And so I think that's a really good point, that if you're using these types of technologies, that managing the configuration and using what you have is a valid strategy now, as the larger providers, once they got base functionality down, are adding these other services.
Yep, absolutely. And we're seeing that more and more and more all of the time. So that is my tech segment for today.
Awesome.
I know we rip on a lot of vendors and we make fun of a lot of vendors on this show, but to actually see a vendor doing the right thing and have that vendor be Microsoft doing the right thing is very, very, very strange. But when it happens, we should absolutely give them kudos.
Absolutely. With that, we'll take a short break and we'll get back to maybe poo-pooing some vendors in the next segment in Enterprise News.
Let's do that.
Stay tuned. Domain Tools help security analysts turn threat data into threat intelligence. They take indicators from your network, including domains and IP addresses, and connect them with nearly every active domain on the internet. Those connections drive risk assessments, help profile attackers, guide online fraud investigations, and map cyber activity to attacker infrastructure. Fortune 1000 companies, global government agencies, and leading security solutions vendors use the Domain Tools platform as a critical ingredient in their threat investigations and proactive defenses. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observeit.com/securityweekly. Are you looking for high-performance data storage that's easy to use yet secure enough for the Department of Defense? Look no further. Racktop Systems gives business software-defined data storage complete with embedded compliance, security, and data encryption. Don't let cyber threats, regulatory demands, or the complexity and growth of your data overwhelm your business. Racktop's high-performance data management platform gives you the tools you need to address the most demanding data challenges. Think beyond storage. To learn more, visit racktopsystems.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. I am here with John Strand for the Enterprise Security News. The first story is VMware launches blockchain project. I know what you're thinking. Blockchain's another buzzword like machine learning. However, I want to go back. John, I don't know if you've watched this segment. Sharon Goldberg came on Business Security Weekly, and we asked Sharon to describe blockchain technologies and gave the best description. Like, I didn't understand it until Sharon explained it to me. And she described it as basically it's a log of transactions. And the use case outside of currency she described was protecting the supply chain. And if you could have that protected log that is afforded by the blockchain technologies, the use case in what did she? There was some kind of product. It was like,
I like the banana analogy. That
was
one
it
works.
coconuts or bananas or something. Yeah, like where has it gone, and if there was any changes, you know, it's logged, and they were applying that, and that's essentially what VMware, the same kind of strategy they're employing when they say interested in employing blockchain technologies as an immutable engine for processing transactions across an extended supply chain is running high. That's correct.
Yeah, it is. And if you're looking at blockchain, you know, kind of boiling it down again, so you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and you might have secrecy, right? You got the CIA triad. It is amazing for confidentiality and availability. The integrity and availability. My bad.
Yes, not
so with
much
integrity, your blockchain and the ledger, the public ledger, the record, the log is public. Everyone can get it. It's distributed. And the integrity is validated because each individual ledger transaction that happens is hashed, and it also includes a hash of the previous transaction as well. So there's a tremendous amount of value, and I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm just going to say outright, anybody now who basically looks at blockchain and poo-poos it and says, oh, geez, blockchain, that's stupid. As soon as you say that, it basically clearly identifies that you know very little about the subject. And I'm going to throw myself under the bus because, Paul, we on the show
I was
absolutely
there too.
have ripped on it. But Bo and Mike, the people that work for me, have beat me into submission. Blockchain has a tremendous amount of value. There's no question about it. And I think that the Project Concord, to try to improve the efficiency of doing things like smart contracts and handling that effectively, is interesting, right? They're basically saying this is not a product segment to ignore. Right. It is weird whenever they start talking about the efficiency and the impact on the environment. I honestly didn't know that blockchain was that impactful on the environment. I know it would generate a lot of CPU cycles, but I don't see exactly how this would improve the CPU performance of blockchain implementation. Did you get any more out of this? It's weird.
Yeah,
they're talking about the project, then all of a sudden they're like impact on the environment halfway through. It was a bit of an abrupt jarring shift in the article.
Yeah, in the interview, Sharon talks about some of the differences in the blockchain technologies. One being a completely public ledger, and one being kind of basically you validate your miners so that only certain people can be a miner essentially. And so I think that there's some of those differences. It depends on how it's implemented And I think at a closing note, what Sharon underscored was that blockchain, specifically as it was introduced with Bitcoin, is one of the greatest computer science achievements in her mind that we've seen in modern times. And after she explained it, I'm like, yeah, like the computer science behind it is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I officially, Paul, I know this is hard for us to admit, I officially am going to say that John Strand was horribly wrong on this particular topic.
Yes, because I think we just viewed it as another buzzword. And
well, it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it is used that way. And I think it's a shame that it does have merits, mostly in currency. I mean, people admit it is very specific to currency, but emerging are these other techniques and use cases, rather, for this technology, which the technology, say what you will about the volatility of cryptocurrency, right? And I think that's another reason why it gets kind of a bad reputation is that volatility in those markets. But look at the underlying computer science behind this technology is amazing.
Well, and it's fundamentally going to change things. I mean, if you look at database integrity and database security, right? If I break into your database right now, I can change the records however I want. You hear the phrase garbage in, garbage out, which is crap. In most environments today, it's garbage in, gospel out. If I can change what's on that database, like if I say, Paul, you now owe $2 million on your home loan, which you don't, right? But if I can make the database or whatever bank you're using for your loan say that, that's the truth. That's the God's honest truth, and no one will be able to argue with that. However, if I take your home loan and we put it into a blockchain, and every single time you make a payment, it's basically that immutable chain that goes through, and immutable should be in quotes, right, or have an asterisk behind it. But it's basically now you have that integrity of the payment history, and I just can't go through and change it on the fly unless you got the 51% attack and dealing with consensus. But it absolutely does fundamentally change the way that we all need to be looking at data. So this is weird for us, but yeah, we were on the bashing bandwagon, and we shouldn't have been.
Yep. So there's a vendor, Cavanix, brings risk foresight to hybrid cloud workload deployments.
What the hell was this one? I read this one twice. I didn't know what the hell they did.
I can't figure out machine learning and predictive analytics technology that provides compliance risk mitigation capabilities.
Is this the one that went Series B last week? No, it's not. That was a different one.
That was a different one, yeah.
That did something very similar, I think. I don't know.
Well, it provides compliance features for workloads that span both on-premise and cloud deployments. Again, this is kind of speaking to the integrity issue we were just talking about, which is why I thought it was somewhat interesting. But I think just poorly worded and communicated exactly what problem they're solving.
Well, and you know what? To be completely honest, they basically took the Unomic technology, which was a narrow market solution, and broadened it for data centers. Which, once again, I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that means either. Yeah.
So I don't think they wrote this. This is somebody else. Well, they probably did write this. I don't. So bad.
Anyway,
I actually feel bad for Sean, the guy that wrote this article. What is it, Sean Kerner? Because he probably got like a hodgepodge of PowerPoint presentations and like, hey, write an article about this. Right? And he's like, what the hell?
Yeah. So Lacework has raised new funds to extend cloud security capabilities. They got a Series B round. Polygraph helps organizations detect potential threats. I thought that, it's interesting when, John, you were talking about the various rounds in how as a consumer you might not care. I think if you got to get through the problem,
you got to care.
Yeah, you got to get through you
got to care.
You got to get through the problem and solution first. If that makes sense, then I think you got to look at funding. And when you're going for a B round, typically, right, not in every case, it means they've proven themselves in the market to sell it enough that someone's giving them a B round and more money. And I don't know what their B round was, but their total funding's $32 million, which is a pretty decent amount of funding up into a B. It means they're selling product and they're solving the problem for some people, I think is the important point that I wanted to just get across in this story. Well, congratulations to Lacework. That's all. I mean, Series B is an awesome milestone for a company, but if you're shopping around, it's a good data point to have because it means they're likely solving some problems for people.
Well, and also looking at it like kind of where we're at, they say they have 30 customers. All right, so we have about 15. What we do and what this means is usually with these small companies like us, we go through and we have customers and we constantly are improving the product based on the customer feedback. So if I'm looking at Lacework and what they're doing everything right? They're starting small. They're getting a small group of customers. They're incorporating the customers' feedback back into the product. And somehow they have proved to Sutter Hill Ventures that there's value. Like, it's not just an idea. They've actually executed that idea effectively with their current customer base. So you're absolutely right. Congratulations to them. And hopefully we can get a good write-up of what they're doing and what Polygraph is. That isn't just a vendor press release.
Canonical, who's a name I've heard before, is being touted as improving Ubuntu Linux security. Now, what I gleaned from it was their messaging on solving the cryptojacking problem, right? Mm-hmm. Which, yes, if you leave Linux computers not secured, someone's going to grab it and use it to either send a DDoS or do some crypto mining. But what I thought was interesting is they've got a Snap application packaging system that looks like it improves upon the packaging system to help keep your systems up to date. Where I got confused is they started talking about containers and being able to shape the container and define what a container is allowed to do. So I don't know. They lost me in the messaging. Are you securing Ubuntu, or are you securing containers, or both, or what is it?
I got this. So APTs, right? And RPMs, right? Mm-hmm. So with Advanced Packaging Tool and Red Hat Package Manager, you can have a package that'll install on the operating system, right? And if you want to update, you do apt-get update, and you can install or do whatever you want from apt. Mm-hmm. So imagine an apt or an RPM that was like a mini Docker for that application. So what you would have with Snaps, it's basically like a little micro container that would run like Chrome, right? Mm-hmm. And you would run within that software package, and you don't have to worry about dependencies or anything. And they all basically, and there's also some sandboxing that you can do. So now if you want to update it, it's very, very much like a container. You just can simply update that specific Snap package on the system, and it's all self-contained. It's not something that's hooking into a whole bunch of libraries. So you remember years ago with RPM Hell, where you're working through dependencies, and this application will require this version of this dynamic link library, and this one will require this version of the dynamic link library. So you can do a symbolic link for this app to go to this DLL and a separate symbolic link to go to it. Sucked. Mm-hmm. But imagine having all that rolled into a very, very small quote-unquote container for that specific application, making it much easier to maintain and update in the process. So
now that you say that, yes, I have seen some applications packaged in Snap, right? Yeah, and it does definitely solve that problem, and I think have great security benefits.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because we all, those of us that have been around for a while remember. Like, hey, I've got an Ubuntu system and I'm doing all my package updates. But then there was that one use case where I had to go off and compile an application, and then it didn't match the libraries that came in through the package manager. So I had to manually download a whole bunch of other libraries and compile them, and then link that to my compiled application. And then that application was running. And then I'm like, well, I'm secure, but no, you haven't updated all that custom stuff you put on the system. So
good God, we're so old.
Right.
But isn't it nice, though, that like these problems that we went through are not the problems our children will have to go through. They're going to have completely brand new problems, which is awesome.
Qualys' messaging on their passive network sensor, which again, as I pointed out, from what I gleaned here, because obviously I worked at Tenable, when I first started at Tenable, we actually spent a lot of time with the passive vulnerability scanner, as it was called back then, PVS, and the patents were made very clear to me as I was producing content that would be used in marketing, right?
Well, Ron Gula got us shirts that actually had the patent on it. I don't know if you remember. Yeah, he was kind of big into that patent for a while.
And I think it was Matt Alderman that was telling me too that they're very defendable patents. There's different levels of patents, and these particular patents are very highly defendable, which is awesome. And the patents are centered around passively detecting vulnerabilities. So when we look at Qualys, that has to compete in the market with Tenable, they've got the passive story, but it seems very focused on asset discovery, not detecting vulnerabilities because of Tenable's patents. So
well, in this whole entire write-down at Market Screener, vulnerability is used once, and that's where they explain Qualys as a company doing vulnerability management. Never else, when they're talking about the passive asset inventory, did they talk about vulnerabilities. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that was completely intentional.
Yeah, but I think it's a valid move for Qualys too. I mean, a patent is a patent, right? But you got to try and be competitive in the market. And if you have a big Qualys, installation, everyone's requirements are different. You want some of that visibility into the stuff you may not know about. I think this is a great move for Qualys.
Very cool.
I'm also very happy for our friends at Minerva Labs as well. And I think it's interesting that this was not an acquisition, that this was a partnership. Even more good for them at Minerva, establishing themselves as a company that's just not going to get swallowed up. I want to see them make good market traction. So they brokered this deal with McAfee for EPO. And the statement I think is so relevant, right? Because now Minerva is deployed alongside McAfee endpoint security. Adversaries, they say, are forced to pick their poison. Either the adversary implements evasive tactics, which get picked up by Minerva, or they use non-evasive techniques, which are likely to get picked up by McAfee endpoint. You specifically, John, have talked about this problem of rip and replace, not rip and replace with your endpoint. Here's a case where you can supplement it. I think it's a great strategy.
And that's where, if you're going to be in the desktop arena, that's where you have to go. Yeah. So if you look at Lenny and the team at Minerva, they can try to take on McAfee. Go for it.
Right.
Eventually McAfee and Symantec are going to start implementing the kind of cyber deception for malware that Minerva has. Right. So if they have patents for it, then they'll just buy the company, or they'll just decide to fight you in court, and you can't win that fight. But if you're trying to do something in the endpoint that is novel, this is the best way to do it. Basically, do an integration with one of the big players and seek some type of cover. And it's a good play by Minerva. Of course, they're not stupid people. We know them. They're very, very, very bright there.
Great move. Congrats to Eddie and Lenny and the whole team over at Minerva. I thought it was a great announcement. Now, what's interesting, Bitdefender. We've covered Bitdefender. This is a company with two totally different solutions. So when you read about Bitdefender and they're talking about an endpoint security product, it's more of like a traditional AV product, which is great. I mean, they've got a good feature set there, and that's what this article is about. Now, don't get that confused with some of the other things that Bitdefender is doing. They've got some really cool like hypervisor security that's targeted at large enterprises. Pay attention to that. If you're listening to the show and you're just burnt out on the endpoint thing and you're not shopping for endpoint, I think Bitdefender is a little more focused on the consumer market anyhow. But on the enterprise side, pay attention to Bitdefender when they start talking about their hypervisor and virtual platform security. It's really good. We did a briefing with them at Black Hat, and I was impressed with their technology. So,
now, do you look at them as a vendor? And I honestly don't know much about them because we don't encounter them very often. Do you look at them as a vendor that's been predominantly in the home space, and now they're trying to make inroads into the enterprise market?
I think there's some of that going on too, and I think that they're based in Estonia, I believe, is where the company comes from. So that may have caused some hesitation on the enterprise space. However, I don't think you should use that as an excuse to discount their solutions. And they're a very deep engineering based organization, in the sense that I got. So I think that they're trying to. My guess is they're trying to message into the enterprise more. On a completely different solution rather than the endpoint. So I think they're trying to diversify. Yeah. So you said something about CrowdStrike, advanced malware searches in hybrid.
Let's jump over the SailPoint one. The SailPoint one makes my head hurt.
Yeah, identity space is anyway.
So I wanted to talk about this some more whenever we were doing the interview. So CrowdStrike has the ability now that you can import Yara rules and do a search across your entire environment for things that match those Yara signatures. And while I think by and large that's absolute complete garbage, if you're using Yara and you're writing your own Yara rules and you're catching malware, that basically just shows that CrowdStrike sucks horribly at what they're doing. However, that doesn't mean that this is absolutely worthless. Actually, that's not at all what this means. But if you're looking at it like that, you're looking at it the wrong way. The reason why this is important is there's a large number of organizations out there. Let's just use government. Let's just use DoD, intelligence community, right? If you're looking to implement a product in your environment, you can't simply take malware that is discovered in your environment, throw it up to CrowdStrike, and say, hey, you guys missed this, write a signature for it. And the reason why is as soon as that signature hits, the adversaries now know that that specific implant has been burnt, and then they will just simply re-instrument a new one and bypass it again. It becomes an arms race and it escalates. So for some organizations that are extremely sensitive, this means a lot. Like, this is tremendously cool. This now means that you can have your core CrowdStrike functionality. And if you want to write your own signature to basically detect some malware that you have found that CrowdStrike maybe missed. Not saying CrowdStrike's crap in that situation, but let's just say that CrowdStrike missed that malware. And you want to be able to detect and eradicate that malware without tripping off the adversary that it has been detected by CrowdStrike. Yara is going to be awesome for that. So this is very, very, very cool. Like I said, especially in the organizations I used to work with, DoD, IC, we would fight this problem all the time where we know we have malware, but we don't want to let the AV vendor know because the AV vendor is going to write a signature. And then the adversary will know that their implant has been burned, and then they're going to re-instrument it again. And we want them to bang against that wall as long as we possibly can. So I like this. This is cool. It gives you that type of functionality. But if you're looking at this as like a standard organization that's not being targeted by nation state adversaries, yeah, this probably isn't a product for you. But if you are one that is being targeted by nation state attackers, this is very, very cool news.
Awesome. So we had an announcement from Atos, which seems like they're targeting the manufacturers of IoT devices and services, which I think we're seeing is kind of an emerging field, right? Like people know that we have this huge IoT security problem. If you're manufacturing anything that uses IoT, you're likely now in search of a vendor to help you secure that. You know, we did the interviews with Microsoft on their Azure Sphere. Atos sounds like a similar kind of thing when they say they deliver, manage, and secure the full IoT value chain from connected devices to edge computing to analytics to smart business solutions. It sounds like a similar thing. And I think these companies are gaining a lot of traction as IoT security basically becomes part of the business now. I think it went from this, hey, no one's going to find our devices, they're too small to implement security, to today where it's entering into the equation of the purchaser. And
you know, there's Paul, there's a video out there. Like if you're talking about IoT, that is amazing. It's by James Minkins. He's a Harvard professor, and it's his keynote at Usenix. You have to watch his keynote at Usenix. It's not just a great presentation, but it's probably one of the best presentations on artificial intelligence, computer security, IoT security I have ever seen.
Nice.
In the past 20 years. But James Minkins, he has a section, it's about 3/4 of the way through, where he says IoT security is boring. And the reason why IoT security is boring is because he said IoT security is like this. A bunch of vendors said, hey, you know what? We're going to take everything we possibly could have come up with for computer security and all the best practices that we've learned over the past 30 years. We're going to throw it out the window because nothing bad could possibly ever happen. And no, and then they fall off a cliff. And I think that sums it up.
It does.
But it's great to look at it from the perspective of IoT security being boring as an individual product by product by product problem, right? Because it's just people doing dumb things, you know, embedding passwords of, 1, 2, 3, 4 or admin, right?
Yep.
But as an enterprise, it is a very relevant problem because you have TVs. Have you hacked your TV like recently? I mean, how many embedded devices do you have in your house? I mean, you got like 4 or 5 TVs. I think your toaster, our fridges, right?
Fridges, certainly. Yes. The smart things, controllers and stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Sure.
So an individual problem is not that interesting, but whenever you couple that with an entire infrastructure, an entire company, it becomes just this horrific nightmare that you can't get your hands around.
Now, my most fun one that I think at home that still kind of like makes me giddy is my sprinkler system. I put the IoT device as the head end for my sprinkler system. And so I literally sometimes I just go show off in front of my neighbors and I just walk around the yard with my phone and like turn my sprinklers on and off.
You gotta send me which one you have because we did the fridge thing.
Yeah,
we could be fridge Twinkies, but now we can be sprinkler system Twinkies too.
The software still kind of sucks on
the
software still kind of sucks on the fridge though. We both had the Samsung.
It's horrible.
Fridge. It's
bad.
Awful. Like it doesn't even. If someone were to hack it, I'd feel bad because their shit is just going to crash. Like it's not even.
So sad.
It's just
so sad.
Just my wife just saw the washer and dryer that integrate with the Amazon Echo platform. And she's like, why don't we have that? I'm like, I don't know. Our washer and dryer died and we needed something fast because we have
Probably
5 people.
Well,
you have 5 people in your house too. You get behind, talk about technical debt, laundry debt is a thing. When 5 people
is absolutely. That is such a great analogy of technical debt. That is literally the best analogy of technical debt ever. So.
Last story, Manage Engine adds Skype for Business to their reporting and Exchange Reporter Plus product platforms. Manage Engine is a decent vendor. I like them for You know, a lot of their solutions, I think they have a valid play in the market, of course, but Skype for Business is just horrible. It's just kind of my soapbox for what Microsoft has done with Skype is just horrible. It's just awful. I mean, we've used Skype almost since like day one on the.
Yep.
I mean, there was lots of other solutions.
It sucked pretty much since day one too.
I mean, it went through fits and starts. You know, I think that Microsoft is really just hardcore killing it now. I think you've seen a kind of nice, you know, graph of waves of Skype working or not working. But now Microsoft is just burying. I mean, the latest update for Skype killed full screen. And every call I get on with Skype for Business is a nightmare, technology-wise. And if you're in, you know, the corporate setting and you're looking, so, you know, you look at how Microsoft is treating Skype, you start to wonder, like, security-wise, are they even paying attention to it? Like, this is dangerous territory. Anytime I feel like it's being neglected at Microsoft, I don't know what's going on. But if you're looking for another solution, what we found in our research is that Zoom is a great platform.
Yep.
And that pretty much seems to be consistent across the board. Zoom customers seem to be pretty happy, and, you know, we're going to be switching over much of our stuff to Zoom. So
very cool.
And that will wrap up this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. John, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.